The crowd at the zoo gasped in horror. A little boy had just been thrown into the tiger's cage. It all happened so fast. One moment, he was standing near the railing, and the next, he was inside, face to face with a massive tiger. The employees and visitors froze, their hearts pounding. Who would do such a thing, and why? The boy, no older than 6, looked up at the enormous beast approaching him. The tiger's golden eyes locked onto his, its muscles tensed as it crept forward. People screamed for help, but the zookeepers hesitated, unsure if they could reach him in time. Then, something unbelievable happened. Instead of attacking, the tiger did something no one expected. The entire zoo watched in stunned silence as the scene unfolded, changing everything they thought they knew about nature, instincts, and the bond between humans and animals. The boy's heart pounded as he sat frozen on the cold dirt floor of the enclosure. The tigers moved closer, their golden eyes locked onto him, their massive paws barely making a sound. The crowd held its breath, some covering their mouths in shock, others frantically calling for help, but no one could look away. The man who had thrown the boy, one of the zoo's employees, stood just outside the cage, his hands gripping the metal bars. His face was pale, his body tense, but there was something strange in his eyes. Was it fear, regret, or something else entirely? Meanwhile, inside the cage, the boy slowly lifted his head. He didn't scream. He didn't run. Instead, he did something no one expected. The tigers, now just inches away, suddenly stopped. Their tails flicked, their ears twitched. And then, in a moment that made the entire zoo go silent, the largest tiger lowered its head. The crowd stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief. The largest tiger, a massive beast with deep orange fur and piercing yellow eyes, lowered its head and sniffed the boy. The other tigers watched closely, their bodies tense, but none of them attacked. It was as if something invisible was holding them back. The boy, still trembling, slowly raised his hand. His fingers barely brushed the tiger's nose when a deep rumbling sound filled the enclosure. The tiger let out a low, vibrating purr, almost like a sign of recognition. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This wasn't fear. This wasn't aggression. It was something else. Outside the cage, the zoo employee's face twisted in panic. His breathing was sharp, his hands gripping the bars so tightly his knuckles turned white. Why wasn't the boy in danger? Why weren't the tigers attacking? And then, before anyone could react, the boy looked up at the man and spoke, his voice calm, but filled with something chilling. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" The zoo fell into complete silence. The boy's words hung in the air like a thick fog, and for a moment, the only sounds were the soft breaths of the massive tigers surrounding him. The employee's face drained of color, his fingers twitching against the cold metal bars. His reaction was more than shock, it was fear. But fear of what? The crowd remained frozen, torn between horror and fascination. The zoo security had arrived, but no one dared to move. The tigers still hadn't attacked. Instead, they lingered near the boy, their massive bodies shielding him as if he belonged there. It was impossible, unbelievable. Yet, it was happening right in front of everyone's eyes. The boy slowly rose to his feet, his small frame standing strong against the looming figures of the tigers. He didn't run. He didn't cry. He just stared at the trembling man outside the cage and said, "Tell them the truth." The employee stumbled back, shaking his head. I don't know what you mean," he stammered. But the boy took a step closer, his voice steady. "Yes, you do." The largest tiger let out a deep, guttural sound, half growl, half warning. The employee flinched. His hands gripped the bars so tightly they turned white. He looked around, as if searching for a way out. The tension in the air was unbearable. The crowd, the guards, the staff, everyone was waiting for an answer, waiting for the truth. And then, just as the employee opened his mouth, something happened that changed everything. A sudden sharp roar echoed through the zoo, shaking the very ground beneath them. The tigers snapped their heads toward the source of the sound, their bodies tense. Something was coming, and whatever it wasn't over yet. The ground trembled slightly beneath them as the deep roar echoed through the air. It wasn't coming from the tigers. It was something else, something bigger. The crowd murmured in confusion, their fear shifting into uncertainty. Even the tigers seemed uneasy, their ears flicking toward the unseen presence beyond the enclosure. The boy didn't move. His eyes, steady and knowing, remained locked on the trembling employee. You can't hide it anymore. The employee's breathing turned ragged. No, this isn't possible, he muttered under his breath, backing away from the cage as if the truth itself was closing in on him. Before anyone could process his words, a sudden gust of wind swept through the zoo. The metal bars of the cage rattled. Somewhere in the distance, another animal let out a sharp, guttural cry, one that didn't belong to any creature in the exhibits. The crowd's panic deepened. Parents clutched their children, whispers turning to frantic questions. Security guards exchanged uncertain glances. Something was very, very wrong. And then, without warning, the largest tiger in the cage turned its head toward the source of the sound and let out a low, almost mournful growl. The boy lifted his hand, pressing his palm gently against the tiger's massive forehead. "It's happening," he whispered. The employee gasped. "No, we locked it away. It shouldn't be able to." A sudden crash silenced him. The ground shook violently, sending dust and debris into the air. The zoo lights flickered. Then, from somewhere beyond the exhibits, the sound of snapping chains rang out, followed by a deep, thunderous growl. Whatever was coming had just been set free. The ground trembled once again, louder this time. Dust and debris swirled through the air, and the tigers in the cage began to grow agitated. The boy, still standing calmly among them, didn't flinch. He could feel the presence, the massive force drawing closer. The employee stumbled backward, his hands trembling as he tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The roar grew louder, the ground shaking with every step of the approaching creature. The cages near the edge of the zoo rattled, the sounds of metal bending, chains snapping, sending a shockwave of fear through the crowd. Then, with a final deafening roar, the source of the noise came into view. It wasn't an animal. Not a tiger, not a lion, something far more dangerous. The creature that emerged was a massive hybrid, part predator, part something else entirely. It was terrifying, its glowing eyes locked on the boy, its body shifting with an unnatural predatory grace. The crowd screamed, running for the exits, but the boy didn't move. He stared directly at the beast as it lumbered toward him, its massive claws scraping the earth. The man, his heart racing, couldn't believe his eyes. The hybrid creature was part of an experiment, something dark that had been buried years ago. It was the zoo's biggest secret, and the boy, it seemed, was the key to controlling it. Just as the creature lunged, the boy raised his hand again, calm and steady. He whispered something no one could hear, and the creature halted. A strange, almost peaceful moment passed. Then, with a sharp, unnatural twist, the creature lowered its head. It was almost as if it recognized the boy. But the boy's next words shattered everything. "It's not just me," he said, his voice echoing through the zoo. "You were never meant to control it. You were always meant to set it free." The hybrid creature, its glowing eyes dimming, turned its attention to the employee, the one who had been so terrified all along. In an instant, it leaped toward him. But just before impact, the ground beneath them cracked open, a sudden explosion sending shockwaves through the zoo. The creature vanished, along with the man who had unleashed it. The zoo fell silent again, the boy standing alone among the tigers, their presence protective, almost as if they knew something the others didn't. And in the distance, something shifted in the shadows. The boy had started something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. The zoo was in chaos, but for the boy, everything was still. The tigers, once poised to strike, now stood protectively around him, as if they had always known what was coming. The hybrid creature was gone, its fate sealed in the explosion that had shattered the ground. The employee, his face twisted in fear and guilt, was nowhere to be found. The secret was buried, but not in the way anyone expected. As the security team arrived, they began to secure the area, but the boy was already walking away, his footsteps silent among the wreckage. The staff tried to approach, but the tigers stood their ground, their eyes watching carefully. No one dared to interfere. The boy's final words echoed in the air long after he disappeared into the shadows. Sometimes it takes a cage to show you what's truly free. And with that, the mystery of the zoo was left for another day, one that would haunt everyone who had witnessed it.